Failure is the condiment that gives success its flavor. That quote from Truman Capote aptly describes an outlook on failure that we have here at Success. Failure isn't something to fear or hide from. We all should accept it when faced with it and use it to our advantage, particularly entrepreneurs. We have one such entrepreneur with us now. Janice Fraser is the CEO and founder of Luxor, whose vision is to unlock the power of entrepreneurship, education, and distribute it globally. Janice also serves as advisor to many startups, including TaskRabbit, Mingli, Popbox, and others. She previously was the CEO of Adaptive Path, where she helped triple the staff and revenues. Like most entrepreneurs, however, not all her ventures have met with success, and that's the reason why we have her with us here today, to discuss her failures and how handling those has led her to success. Janice, welcome to Success. Such a pleasure to have you here today.
Well, thank you so much.
As I mentioned, you have a successful company now, but at one time you went through a rather rough patch in life that was coupled with the failure of one of your startups.
Right.
Share that story with us.
So I had been the co-founder and then the first CEO of a very successful company called Adaptive Path that you mentioned before. And I left there at the very end of 1996. My last day was actually December 31st, 2006. Forgetting a decade there. And when I left Adaptive Path, I had an open invitation to share office space with someone who was to become a great mentor and advisor of mine, a man named Mitchell Kapor. And Mitch had open office space that he would just let entrepreneurs come and use. And I ended up staying there for a couple of years and founding a company called Emmett Labs. And the idea of Emmett Labs was very kind of big and almost, Wikipedia in scope. And I really believed in it. It was very much a heartfelt project. What we were doing was mapping the social network of the past. And if you think about, how all of us are as humans, right? We all have these relationships that shape us and form us and help us to imagine, something better or greater for ourselves. So what I wanted to do was know those stories for all of history, all, 600 billion people who have ever lived. I used to joke that, Jesus had a social network and Einstein had a social network, and what did those relationships contribute to their lives? And so that was my project, not the most coherent business model behind it. So I would say that's certainly a set of learnings around that. No clear revenue model, but in the great tradition of venture-funded startups, I believed that it was a swing for the fences. I raised some capital. In all, it ended up being about $800,000 in capital. And we built a product, and for various reasons, never actually launched it. We did, but not until we were about out of money. And there were a series of mistakes that we made. We did certainly a number of things well, but there was a series of mistakes, and ultimately, the company failed. I just absolutely ran out of money. And it was really unpleasant, I've got to say. Of all the experiences that I've had in entrepreneurship, that was by far, laying off that staff was by far one of the most painful. And yet it was also a tremendously valuable learning experience. And what I've been able to do is use the experiences that I had with Emmett Labs to inform not only how I'm running this company, but also to really understand some of the lessons that are coming out with things like Lean Startup and, the business model canvas and all of these new ideas that are coming out about entrepreneurship. I'm letting my failure, this kind of profound moment of failure, help me to understand why these things work and what we did wrong. And it's been actually, I think it's been quite helpful in my current efforts to support startups to have had that experience.
So let's talk more about those learning experiences. You wrote a letter to your investors that outlined the 10 things that you did wrong as the CEO. Talk to us about why you did that, and then what was the response that you got?
So I have absolutely the best network of investors ever. I really am so fortunate. And I felt that they had put their faith in me. And all of these investors, I want to say, were angel investors, which means they were investing their own money, not somebody else's money. And I took that as a a very personal responsibility that people were trusting me, and that while they knew better than I did the risk that they were taking, I still felt that I owed them the benefit of whatever wisdom I could get out of this unfortunate situation. And so I took some time before doing this. So I actually wrote the letter about maybe a year after shutting down the day-to-day operations. And I said, this is unfortunately the end of the company. And in the interest of kind of taking something positive out of it, here are the things that I believe contributed to our failure. And I hope that this is of value to somebody else. So that's why I did it. And what was wonderful about it is that the email that I got back, I did this all by email, and the email that I got back from Mitchell Kapor, who was my first investor and really has been quite just an incredible mentor to me over a number of years. And the email that he sent back to me said, he thanked me for doing this, and he asked my permission to share it with his other portfolio CEOs. And he gave me real kudos for having the courage to do that. And, I don't think I did anything particularly special. What I now know is a lifelong commitment to entrepreneurship, that this is how we become better entrepreneurs. We share in community with each other what we've learned, good and bad, so that maybe somebody else will avoid some of the mistakes that we made. So for me, it felt very natural. I was simply paying forward or paying back a lot of the great advice that I had received over the previous years.
So if you don't mind, I'd love to just read a couple of sentences from Mitch's response to your letter, if you don't mind. So
please go ahead.
He wrote, Janice, you are demonstrating a rare and extremely admirable quality in your interest in sharing learnings from these which didn't work. These are extraordinarily valuable gifts for others to benefit from. So obviously it was very well received and appreciated. So I'd love for you to share a few things from that letter, not the specifics, but things that would help our listeners not make the same mistakes themselves. So what did you discover, having gone through this, that you could prevent others from stepping on those same landmines or trapdoors?
So there are two in particular that stand out for me kind of above the rest. And one is you have to launch your product. And I say launch because I work in a kind of software technology enabled space, but it doesn't matter whether you're a caterer or a software technology developer. Or a consultant. What you need to do is actually take your idea, your product, and get it to market as quickly as you can. One of the things that we did that was really damaging to us is that we focused on revenue and forgot to launch. So I was doing deals with what seemed to be wonderful companies that wanted to use our software in a quote-unquote white label way, where they would use our software for their own purposes. But that was really a distraction, and it delayed our launch by a full 6 months. And ultimately, it wasn't building the business that we wanted to have when we were done, right? So because I was focused on revenue, I forgot to launch, which sounds a little flippant, but it almost feels like that. And now what we do with Luxor, we launch often, and sometimes we're launching things that make us a little uncomfortable, like a little sick to our stomach, because we know it's not as good as it ought to be, and we're a little embarrassed to be putting it out there. And we've decided that if we're not a little embarrassed, then we've waited too long to launch. And so we've really taken that to heart.
Okay, so one is launch, as Seth Godin says, you just got to ship. You got to ship the product, get out. So that's one.
Yep.
What would be a second one?
The second one, this one is really know when life has interrupted you and take appropriate action. So the time frame that we're talking about with this company, Emmett Labs, the time frame was 2008 and 2009. And I don't know if you remember what happened in 2008 to the world economy, but it was pretty dire. Mm-hmm. And 2009, there was just nothing happening. It was really a disaster. And that is an unavoidable truth. And no amount of effort on my part could get us around that. There was just nothing to do. And the second thing that went into that time is that there were 2 deaths in my family, my brother and my father. Literally within 3 months of each other died. And so you have this kind of 1-2 punch of personal tragedy. It was very hard for me to roll with. And then you had the economy, this external force. And there was no way that I could make the clear-headed, rational decisions given the degree of my personal disruption. And I have to say, we wouldn't have made the other mistakes if I had been clear-headed. And so I think that for me, the lesson is that sometimes our dogged commitment, the just get up and do it, pull yourself up, get the job done, that real perseverance that entrepreneurs have actually can work against you. And that there are moments where you need to just, take a deep breath, take care of yourself, and step aside. And I have no doubt that I could have asked Mitch to help me find an interim CEO when I had this personal set of tragedies happen. And I'm sure that we would have found a solution. But I didn't think I had the permission to call Uncle. I didn't think that I had the permission to just say, you know what, I'm broken. I need 6 months. And in 6 months, I'll come back and I'll engage fully. But if I had done that, the company may have survived that year and we may have had a future. But because I felt that there was this obligation that I had to be the one to do it, that I wouldn't give up. And I really think that caused us to make a lot of mistakes.
So sometimes you just have to let life take center stage and know when to say uncle and find a replacement for yourself for a period of time. That's a great lesson. I think a lot of people listening have probably gone through similar situations and probably tried to carry the weight of the world on their shoulders through some of those difficult periods of life, and it probably cost them in more areas than just their personal life. So
yeah,
the key here is that we all fall down, and falling down is not the problem. It's getting back up, right? So how did you pick yourself up? What did you think? What did you do? What actions did you take? If you look back on it now, what were the right things that you did to try to get yourself back up again?
Wow, that's a hard question. I had a fantastic personal support system. I had a terrific friend who had been my co-founder at Emmett Labs. I had a wonderful husband who was incredibly supportive. And so every time I said, oh God, I spent all the family money starting that company and, how irresponsible, et cetera, he would say, we made every decision together and we made the right decisions given the information we had at the time. So I had this great husband who helped me to deal with the guilt that I had. And I also had a fantastic therapist. Like seriously, someone who was able to just sit and talk to me about the personal ramifications of failure. And that, I think that having those people around me helped me to stand up, brush myself off, hang out my shingle again. I started taking some consulting work, even though I really don't ever want to do consulting work again. And, started bringing in money, started helping people make their companies. And, once I got started again, it got better. So it was just about putting one foot in front of the other, I think.
So you have this support system and you sought help, which is great. And still, I would say resilience is a word that I would use to describe you, because you went through so much, all the tragedy in your life, as well as what was happening to you business-wise, and yet you came back and started Luxor. So what do you think makes you so resilient, and how do you think others can cultivate this important quality in themselves if you were to sort of kind of seek within and then use that from what you observed to advise others?
So I don't know whether it's a fortunate thing that I'm resilient or what. I came to my resilience as a direct result of a messed up family home life as a child. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs actually do. I think there's a disproportionate number of people who come from a very sort of disrupted family life. And in my home, it was mental illness. I had a father with bipolar disorder. My mother's a sober alcoholic. I have a sister with schizophrenia. I have a brother who actually took his own life through as a result of narcissistic personality disorder. So there's me and a healthy sister, and it's the two of us who have sort of survived. And we've not only survived, we've thrived. And I think it's that I'm just blessed with a personality that won't give up and that has very high standards for what I want my life to be and for what I think that the world can be. And the best way that I can contribute to that future is to be the best entrepreneur that I can be and to activate other people's entrepreneurial passion. And I'm getting a little choked up because it really is that's where my resilience comes from. It comes from being in a really difficult environment and making it through.
Well, I love hearing this because I know a lot of people say that they had a tough upbringing or that they have crazy brothers and sisters, but I think you have.
I won the jackpot.
Yeah, I think you've eliminated all their excuses now, so that's great to have you reveal. Thank you. I read a quote from you where you said there's much more talk about failure than there's tolerance for it. It's disappointing when you realize failure is much more painful. Tell us why you think people are game to talk about failure, but don't ever seem to be ready to actually handle it.
It turns out that failure is very hard on one's self-esteem. And I think that we all want to tell our stories of failure from the point of view of, on the one hand, yes, I fell over, it didn't work, but then I took these actions and voila, I became successful anyway. And when you're going through a failure, when you're actually having to make the decision of, am I going to shut down this company? Am I going to lay these people off? Am I going to have to give back the money? All of those decisions, you don't want to hear the message like, if I just tried one more thing, then I could get it right. And so I think that it is, I think of it sort of like a 16 puzzle. And when I say think of it, I think of starting a company, like running one of those 16 puzzles, with the little tiles that you slide back and forth. I'm constantly trying to figure out what combination makes the picture right. And as you approach those moments where you just know that something you're doing isn't working, and it doesn't have to be the full company failure. It could just be this hire didn't work out. I really had high hopes and it's just not working and I'm going to have to let them go. Whatever level of failure we're talking at, if you believe that something you could do could rescue the situation, then you will never have peace. And there's a certain moment where you have to accept, okay, this isn't going to work, and then turn that corner to action. As long as you think that you can keep messing with the 16 puzzle and maybe you'll get it right, you won't take the action you need to take. So I think that it's difficult because we keep all trying to find the way that the tiles fit together and make that perfect picture. And I think that's why it might be very hard. And, acceptance is disappointing.
So during your lowest and hardest times, I'm sure people gave you all sorts of advice, both good and bad. Share the one piece of advice that you found to be the most inspiring or helpful.
So there's one quote that really helped me during some of the difficult times. And these are not just the personal grief, but also the sense of loss at losing my company and sometimes when things go wrong. And it's a quote by Aeschylus. And it goes like this. Even in our sleep, pain which cannot forget falls drop by drop upon the heart, until in our own despair, against our will, comes wisdom through the awful grace of God. And what that means to me is that over time, in little bits, I'm healing, even though I may not notice it at the moment. And that really gives me a sense of the inevitability of recovery, of feeling better, of having more courage and being ready to go on.
So the last question I have for you today, Janice, if you could boil down all of your experiences with failure into one single lesson, what would that be? Something every person listening can leave with that will be helpful to them as they traverse the minefield of failures themselves.
I'm sure I didn't make this up, but I really believe the only true failure is the failure to try. And that merely the act of making one's own imagined possibilities into something real is the most glorious thing a person can do. And for some of us, that means doing it through the vernacular of business. And for others, it means music or art.